Welcome to the Simply Smart podcast, where automation meets innovation. Each episode dives into real-world strategies, success stories, and expert insights that help you work smarter, not harder. Why do organizations need governance for AI? Part 2.
So real quick, what happens if they don't have the proper governance in place? Obviously, there's downside ramifications for that, right? You could have a lot of risk coming, but tell our audience a little bit about what kind of issues could there potentially be without that type of governance in place?
Yes, reputational damage is the first. So if you don't have the right governance in place that we've talked about, your model or your application could do things that infringe on copyright, for example, right? Or it could give a patient or a customer wrong information. And we've all heard about the chatbots that make up policy, right? That you're talking to a chatbot and it just makes something up because you don't have governance in place about what that chatbot can say, right? It may infringe on HIPAA, or it may be highly biased, right? That model may be, or that application may be highly biased. It could not be secure, right? If you don't have the right security in place, maybe data in transit is not encrypted because you haven't thought about that and you don't have governance that is looking at security and data privacy and SOC 2 and other IT risk, right? IT risk frameworks that have to be in place especially when you're in where we sit in this healthcare space. It's extremely important. Your customers are not going to trust a generative AI powered chatbot if it gives them wrong information.
I would just couple of things is that one thing is that without having the governance guardrails around the ever-growing portfolio of your AI product, you are inadvertently, um, as a collateral damage, absorbing a lot of risk that may realize or manifest down the road, not immediately, but at a point when you can least afford to address that risk.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Cost control is another one, and of course the standards. When you lose control of standards, it's just like your AI solutions are proliferating like the weeds in the jungle, as opposed to a garden. Right? With the
Yeah.
governance, you have an AI garden. Without governance, you
Yeah.
have jungle.
Wow, that's really powerful. And it was interesting. I remember hearing from, I think it was the Google CEO at the time. This was maybe last year, but I know that when he was being interviewed, it was very interesting at the time where they were saying, "So what concerns do you have?" And the concern was oversight of AI, the governance around it, right? And this is coming from Google, right? And so the fact of the matter is there's not there, you have to have those guardrails up, to your point, because if you don't, there's a lot, as much as there's a lot of good information, there's also a lot of bad information, right? And things that aren't true. And so how do you really do that? That's a really good point, that if you don't have those guardrails up, think about the risk, not even just in, well, obviously we all know, and Andrea mentioned healthcare. We know that HIPAA, those things are really important. We've got to have the right governance in place to make sure that we aren't running a risk there. But also even other industries, the reality is that a lot of organizations, it's important that whatever it is right. And that's where the human aspect actually comes in, right? So we've got the technology, but the humans are the validation, right? So
Absolutely. Your organization needs to have a healthy skepticism and be extremely knowledgeable about what generative AI can and cannot do, and how that system that you're using or that you're putting in your hands of your customer, how it was built, because they are your responsible AI stewards, your employees are. So they are the guardrails. You do not want unsupervised AI running rampant in your organization.
Yeah.
You must have humans in the loop, but the humans have to know what to look for, and they have to know the limitations of generative AI. So it's extremely important to make sure that your employees are part of the design process, right? You need to have them at the table with you when you are designing a solution. But a healthy skepticism is extremely important.
I think the world is oblivious to that because right now they are so much dazzled
Mm,
by the technology shininess of this. But
mhm,
that's the realism that you have to. It is still your core responsibility as a business, and
Yeah.
you're answerable to the regulatory bodies to make sure that even 10 years later, your record retention, and if you need to redo the analysis for whatever legal reasons, you can do that with confidence. So that's why I say that I don't say these things lightly, the importance of governance.
No, that's great. That's great. And I like how, Andrea, you mentioned healthy skepticism. That was something that, I like that term because it says you could be skeptical, but you're doing that for the right reason, right? So
Right.
that's
You're
really
doing
good.
it as a steward,
Right.
right? It's
Right.
much like data stewardship, right? To
Right.
think about it as responsible AI stewardship as well.
No, that's great. That's great. So I just have a couple more quick questions I wanted to ask to get through this. But one question I wanted to ask is, I think you mentioned that there were some key steps that were involved. Like, can you lay out for our audience, like what would maybe be, I don't know if you have like 3 or 4 or 5 key steps that you would want to share that will kind of help our audience understand, like, how do they get started and what are those key steps that they might need to make sure and include.
No, for sure. For sure. Thank you, Matt. That's a great question. And I think a lot of organizations struggle with where do I start, right? And that's where we shine, right? We help them, first of all, to define clear objectives because you don't want to be this me too or FOMO. I'm just doing it because everybody else. We need to use a right. We need to use GPT, right? Like that's not the reason, right? You should be utilizing it because you want to create a better patient or customer experience. You want to enable or empower your employees. You're looking at ROI. There's got to be a reason you're looking at scale. The other thing that you need to do is truly have your internal policies and guidelines in place. So, and then monitoring and auditing. Lalit talked a lot about how important that is from a technology and architecture standpoint, as well as just the output, right? Maybe you put that chatbot out there a month ago and it was answering everything great. But now, 2 months later, there's been this drift for whatever reason, and FDA's knocking at your door saying, what in the world is this thing telling patients now? Because that's what's going to happen, right? It was okay. And then something changed and now it's out of compliance, right? So you've got to continually monitor and audit. And then this, the last would be this fostering a culture of transparency, like we talked about, that healthy skepticism, that your whole org is responsible as stewards of AI, and that people will speak up when they see things not going in the way that they should. So those are some of the, I'd say, 5 steps that we will help organizations go through.
That's great. That's great. So you mentioned define clear objectives, establish policies and guidelines within the organization, create the cross-functional teams so that they're all working together, monitor and audit, and then
Yeah,
foster a culture of transparency. Those are really good 5 key steps. Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
thank
So
you.
so my final question kind of leads to, so where does this go from here? So as we think about the future of agentic AI and where things are going, where do you kind of see things going in here, maybe in the near term, or maybe even somewhat in the longer term, but probably more in the near term? But what do you see on the horizon at this point? Because you're a bit on the front lines here of what's going on with these organizations using AI. So.
Yeah. So Matt, governance is the first thing, and then also the organizations accordingly should start to prepare, because AI project management is not the same as traditional software or IT project management. There are cycles, very strong cycles of research, trial and error, experimentation. Uh, those processes need to evolve and make room for those. These more and more AI solutions or the projects will start to put more pressure on existing Scrum processes also, agile processes, agile safe practices will need to evolve accordingly, because again, those agile safe are very heavily oriented towards software engineering, but they have to create room and adapt accordingly for AI solutions. That's one thing. Another thing I see is that, uh, and it's my personal take from experience, that not going full blown onto AI throughout the organization, but pick and choose your window of opportunity very carefully, where you have the least risk from your reputation perspective, from solution management perspective, to in comparison to the value it delivers. I would like to quote here Professor Arvind, is a professor of computer science at Princeton, who did 5 years of research since 2019 and recently published this book called AI Snake Oil. I really love that, which tells about that which solutions you should adopt and with healthy skepticism versus it is a pure hype. Example that he cited was that predicting someone's criminal behavior, that's not AI. Or an AI mayor. I mean, it just blows your mind. People think crazy that AI is the panacea. It can do anything, right? So I'm not surprised that if people say that AI can produce babies for you, but think about it. No, that's the that's the AI snake oil that I would say organizations need to be very, very mindful of and very carefully choose the AI solutions that need to implement. And last, I would close is that as with any technology, AI brings a lot of the challenges and new cyber attacks and new threats from the technology point of view. We have seen that, and more of that is going to be coming. Deep fake, and now companies are interviewing. They are keeping your voice. They are keeping your face. For God's sake, if their system is hacked, by the way, I don't want to give consent. So it's not an option. I would say, okay, I don't want to interview with you, but I'm not in a position to negotiate. So if I have to interview, I am forced to sign the consent. Now I gave away them my facial feature. I gave them away my voice, which are the most important God gifted part of my identity, which no human being can change. And I just expose that to risk. But if their system is hacked, right? So my identity is compromised. So I would say that those threats are coming. Companies need to be very mindful of what they ask for in terms of consent.
I like that, and I like how you mentioned the fact is maybe start small and build on it, right? Because that gives you the capabilities of kind of seeing and making sure and validating before you just go into something bigger, right? Because the more you go into it, the more there's potential risk. So at least start off, and it's a learning process, right? And so you brought that up. So it's really good points. Really good points. Andrea, anything else you wanted to add?
I also think what customers and what companies will start to see, and you're probably hearing a bit about agentic AI, where you have agents that are performing activities or that have a domain right? That, yeah, I think even today in Copilot or in Teams, you can invite an agent into a conversation or into a meeting. But what I will say is that it's not about the technology that agentic platforms now bring to the organization. It's how do your employees work with those agents, right?
That's really fascinating. Really, really good information. And when Andrea, when you were saying that, first thing I pictured in my mind was like when you mentioned talking over each other was like iRobot or some sci-fi movie where like they're all kind of doing their own thing and not paying attention to the guidance that they're given. But very, very fascinating. Thank you both so much for joining us today. I think this has been very helpful. We'll have to have you come back again because I'm sure our audience will probably have a lot of questions and be very interested. And this is quite frankly why here at Simply Smart we like to partner with organizations like Unique Minds and the capabilities that they provide. I mean, there's a lot of potential right here in Indianapolis of organizations. A lot of organizations don't think of Indiana as being a real tech community, but it's really building up. And we can obviously hear from folks like yourselves with the level of experience that you have that it's just great to partner with an organization like UniqueMinds.ai, and looking forward to more opportunities as we partner with us here at Simply Smart. So thanks again for joining us today.
At Simply Smart, we help companies work smarter, not harder. Until next time, have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Simply Smart podcast. If you're ready to work smarter, not harder, visit simplysmart.io or our LinkedIn page to speak with a team member. See you next time.